rich heritage, but few of us know how that heritage came to be and how many fascinating pieces of history contributed to its life today. Our guest tonight is not only the director of the Hyde Park Historical Society Museum, but also a woman who was born right on the Roosevelt estate, and she's compiled a fascinating pictorial history of the town that dates back to 1821. We'll talk to Margaret Marquez about that book next on Hudson Valley 6. On the Hudson, and you know, people hear about Hyde Park a lot. You know, we go through there, we see the Vanderbilt, we see the Roosevelt, but the place is really rich in history, and not only do you know it because you've done studies on it, you were born right in the midst of the history, weren't you?
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
I mean, explain a little bit to our audience, just so we get an underpinning of where you came from. I mean, you were born on the farm that the Roosevelts had, right?
That's right. I was born on the Roosevelt farm, which belonged to James and Sarah Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. My grandfather had been the head farmer, and after him, my father. So it's been a long connection with the Roosevelt family. And although my father died when he was young as a result of a fall, we still had close contact with the Roosevelts. Old Mr. Roosevelt had died, but Sarah Roosevelt came to visit my grandmother regularly. Mm-hmm. And after my grandmother died, she came to visit my mother. And after my mother died, she came to visit me.
So in essence, without me putting words in your mouth, you basically became part of their family, not...
Yes, this is something that is kind of hard to make people understand, that I don't have ill feelings about things that other people may have, because I feel toward them as though they were my friends, and you don't criticize your friends mm-hmm. like you might someone else. And so because of the close contact with my grandparents and my parents, I just grew up thinking of the Roosevelts as friends, and they treated us like family.
Well, you have to understand that many people throughout the nation also, even today, consider them as friends. I mean, just from his talks through the radio and everything, it was a
yes.
first there, you know, so you're not alone, I mean, you know.
No, but I think I have a little different connection than a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you were on the farm before he was president, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when he was the governor and other things, right?
No, we left the farm in 22.
Oh, okay.
And then had constant contact with him, like going to Christmas parties right. and things like this, besides the visits at our own home. So
let me just get this straight. So you were born there, and through all those years, I mean, what was it like up there? Just this large estate and farmland, and they hired your family to kind of run the whole estate, the farming part of it?
The farm part.
Yes.
The farm part was separate from the estate.
Uh-huh.
The estate had its own superintendent.
What did they farm?
What did they farm?
Yes.
Oh, they had horses and cows and pigs and chickens and vegetables and a dairy. They made their own butter. And when they went to New York for the winter, mm-hmm. all these foods were shipped by train from Hyde Park mm-hmm. to New York. And of course, we had a railroad station in Hyde Park then, so it went on the 7 o'clock train, and they picked it up in New York.
Well, see, I don't want to open up a can of worms, and this is not something for you to really address, but why don't we stop at Hyde Park anymore?
Well, I guess because cars were so plentiful that people didn't travel on the train.
But they stopped, you know, right around Poughkeepsie and right back.
Well, yeah, but Poughkeepsie's bigger than Hyde Park was. We only have the notables stopping at Hyde Park, like the King and Queen of England.
Wasn't Route 9 once called King's Highway?
Yes. Yes, that was the original.
Was during the war, I mean, right around.
Well, that was during the Revolution.
Right.
Yes, yes.
And then it changed. Why did the name change?
Became Albany Post Road mm-hmm. because of delivering mail, and all along the.
Is that because we defeated the king?
Well, sure. But all along the Albany Post Road are little markers every mile called a milestone, mm-hmm. and that indicates on that stone how many miles to New York. Mm-hmm. And that was for the postman. riding horseback to deliver
Now,
mail.
are some of those lines still there, those marks?
All of them.
Where? Now where?
Well, all along the highway. You just look.
Well, I will now.
They're little oval-top sandstones, and when Roosevelt was governor, he passed a regulation that all of these milestones be protected with a little fieldstone enclosure. And there's one right in front of the Roosevelt estate. There's one in the Archibald Rogers had a big estate in Hyde Park, and he enclosed a big one in his wall. And then every mile along, there's a milestone.
So if someone wanted to take like a class and just go along, walk a couple of miles, and they really studied it, they could find those markings?
They're right out in the open, right off the side of the highway.
Well, you're making me feel funny because I've been here and I never see anything.
Well, you don't look.
Well, I will
You've been
now.
looking for other things.
Well, I'm going to look now.
All right.
But you didn't know, I mean, the history. And when you were born and working there, you didn't think of the Roosevelts as, I mean, as the people that they were. You just saw them as these people you worked for that just were kind to you, right?
Right, right.
It wasn't something that we're here with the governor or the would-be or the president would-be. It was just...
Oh, no, no. Also, when I was 3, my brother was dressed as Uncle Sam, and I carried a photograph of Franklin Roosevelt when he was running as vice president with Cox. So I started my campaign early.
When you left the estate, you said in 1922 you left.
Yeah.
Where did you go live?
Well, we lived in a house in the village that my father owned.
The village of Hyde Park.
Yes.
Why did you never leave?
Well, I guess I was happy there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously you loved it because, you know, most people, if they've been raised in the history, some people just don't have an interest in history.
Well, you know, there were 6 kids in our family. I'm the only one that stayed.
And they all went to different parts of the country?
Yeah.
When you decided to, this is kind of the question I was getting at before, because sometimes people just don't have an interest in the history, even though they've lived right in the midst of it. Where did you know that you felt like this is so special that I want to bring that heritage to the people of Dutchess County and the Hudson Valley?
Well, I've always been interested in local history. I guess I'm kind of nosy. You know, I like to dig up things. And I was just interested in what happened in the area, where and who and what. And so just kind of listened. And then it seemed to me that an awful lot of Hyde Park history was forgotten. We're noted. Hyde Park is noted all over the world for President Roosevelt.
Yes.
But there's a great deal of other history in Hyde Park. And it had never been recorded. We were always included in Dutchess County history.
Right.
And I felt it was time that some of the Hyde Park history was recorded.
When did you become the director of the museum, the Historical Museum at Hyde Park?
Oh, probably 4 years ago.
Now, how did that come about? Obviously, they figured this is the
Just
best person we could get.
No, it's not, no complications. If you're vice president, first vice president of the Hyde Park Historical Society, you're in charge of the museum. And that's what happened. I'm first vice president.
Yeah, but, I mean, it was pretty nice that you had all this history behind you, too, right?
Well, it helps. It helps.
I mean, they could get 2 birds in one stone. They could have you be the director, and you can also do the tours, right? And just tell everybody.
Well, no, volunteers do
I
the
know,
tours.
I was joking.
And it's open Sunday afternoon and Wednesday afternoons from 1 to 4. And many people right in Hyde Park have never been there, but there are a lot of things of interest there, and they should go.
Why do you think, quickly, why do you think they've never gone there? Just because it's on their own doorstep?
They're just not interested, I guess, or maybe a lot of people don't even realize.
Okay. Well, hold up the book here. This the Hyde Park on the Hudson. It's just a fascinating book. You've compiled a bunch of pictures. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to look at some of the pictures that are in there. It has some fascinating history. Stay with us. Marquez has compiled a fascinating book called Hyde Park on the Hudson. What was Hyde Park, before we get to some of the pictures, we're going to put them up in a few seconds, what was Hyde Park like, let's say, during the Civil War? What was the
wasn't here.
Huh?
I wasn't here during the Civil War.
But you know the history. It goes back to 1821, doesn't it, the pictures?
Yes.
Yeah, so what were some of the...
Well, as far as I know, Hyde Park people took part in the Civil War, and I don't know. It was a very small town.
Right.
Very small town. And there were mills in town which provided material for the uniforms of the soldiers.
Okay.
Also, food was collected and given to the camps. Other than that,
Most of the battles didn't come up this far,
No,
as far as we know.
no,
Right? Just that
no.
they were working and sending things to them. We're going to go to some pictures now, and you've compiled a bunch of them up, and we're going to look at them and show our audience some of the interesting facts about them, okay? I think we have them. Yeah, well, this is the... you explained it. This is the cover of the book,
This
right?
is the cover, and the publishers asked us to submit 3 pictures that we might like to have on the cover, and we did, but we preferred this one, and they used it. Now, this is an ice yacht, and it was a very popular sport on the river before World War II, because the river freezes solid, and it was not kept open in the wintertime. So these boats had the freedom of the river, and they go by the wind and the sail. There's no motor, no pollution of any kind. And most of the wealthy men had ice yachts, but also a lot of village people. And they would race the trains. And with a good wind, the ice yachts, or we always call them ice boats, could surpass the trains.
That sounds like a fascinating sport.
But it's kind of a scary thing.
Yeah.
I had a ride once on an ice boat, and the river is not exactly smooth. There are little ridges, and you're going so fast, and the wind is so strong, and you hit a little bump, and you feel like you're going to fall off, but you don't.
Well, so you picked this one over 2 other entries for the cover.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And what else do we have? Here's another picture of a beautiful church.
That's the oldest church in Hyde Park. That's the Reformed Dutch Church.
Now, where is that located?
Right on Route 9, just north of the traffic light by the post office.
Right. Okay.
And that originally was started by the Stoutenberg family, who were the first settlers in Hyde Park. And Luke Stoutenberg gave the land for the church. And it was a non-denominational. And that was written right in the regulations that any Christian preacher could preach there.
In that pulpit.
And the only thing was it was first come, first served. So if they had 2 or 3 people who wanted to preach, they had to take their turns. And it remained that way for 10 years with all the village people attending the church. It was not this building, but an earlier one.
When did the Stoutenbergs come into town?
1742.
Now, is this church still functioning that way as a non-denominational church?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's an active church, and it's been in continuous use ever since it was started.
And the Stoutenberg family, they still have well, we went on to the next one, but they're still in the area?
So, oh, yes, and they have an association that meets annually in Hyde Park. And these are 2 of the church windows, stained glass, which were given in memory of members of the Stoutenberg family.
How do these, and I know it might not be in your area of expertise, but how long does it take to construct one of these stained glass windows?
A long time. And all of our church windows have scenes in them of some kind. These are more scenic than some, but at the top of every church window is a scene, and almost all of them have something to do with water.
With water?
Water,
Right.
because the river was so important.
Yes. Okay, and what do we have here? Do we have okay, who's this gentleman?
Oh, this is Dr. Samuel Bard,
Okay.
who operated on George Washington, lived in Hyde Park, was a very eminent physician in New York, created the first New York City hospitals and College of Medicine, and developed the property which is now the Vanderbilt estate.
Really? Now, do many people, Was his original home on the estate, or was it just off in the village somewhere?
No, this man's home was where the Vanderbilt house is now.
Oh, okay.
His father came first, Dr. John Bard, and he lived on the east side of the road, but Dr. Samuel lived on the west side.
And do you know what he operated on President Washington? What was was that a serious thing?
Well, it was serious at the time. Washington had been inaugurated as president, and only a couple of weeks later had a great deal of pain in his leg and developed a high fever. And they called Dr. Samuel Bard because he was the noted physician of the time. And he analyzed his problem as a carbuncle. Now, I always think of carbuncles on your neck, but President Washington had a carbuncle on his thigh, which had been neglected and had gone very deep, and it kills the surrounding tissue. It extracts pus and kills the surrounding tissue, so it had to be operated on. And Dr. Samuel asked his father, Dr. John, who was 73, to assist him. They operated on Washington's leg with no painkiller, just cutting deep, and the father...
They didn't use anything?
Nothing.
Not even a swig of whiskey?
Well, I don't know about that, but it doesn't tell that in the story. But when Samuel thought he'd gone deep enough, Dr. John said, go deeper. And he had to cut deeper. And it took Washington 12 weeks to recover from the operation.
That's
because
amazing.
It was so deep. But during the 8 days from the operation, the streets were closed off. Straw was spread on the sidewalk, so there'd be no noise to disturb the president. And then, after he recovered somewhat, his carriage had to be redesigned so that he could appear in public in the carriage, but he couldn't walk. So he was in a half-reclining position. So he wanted people to be assured that he was okay.
Right. Now, he started to walk shortly after that? How long did it take? Or was
it took weeks before he could walk unassisted.
It's amazing.
And then he hadn't recovered from that very much when he got pneumonia. And they said that he was subject to colds anyway. And Dr. Samuel and Dr. John Bard stayed with him 109 days constantly to doctor him for pneumonia.
Isn't that fascinating?
And he lived 10 years after that, so they did a good job.
I think we're going to take a quick break now. We'll come back, look at some more pictures, and talk about more of the history of the book.
Sure.
Okay. We're going to take a break. Stay with us. There's a lot more to talk about. This book's been selling a lot, too. You'll have a chance to get one. Hang in there. Been selling in Hyde Park. They only had a bunch of them, and they sold them all out, didn't they?
Well, it's circulated pretty well, but the main source is Fiddler's Green Bookstore in Park Plaza.
But don't you have an event coming up, too? Where's an event coming up, and where are you going to sell them?
Oh, yeah, Sunday I'm going to sign books at Barnes & Noble.
Sunday, what day is it?
The 22nd.
22nd at Barnes & Noble at what time?
2 to 4.
2 to 4. And this book right here, I don't know if we can get it up here, the picture we just had, Hyde Park on the Hudson, and it has amazing pictures in here of so many things and so much history. It's a great book to go through. But you have more pictures we want to look at right now for the audience, right?
Sure.
Let's see if we can come up with some of those pictures there. There's the president.
This is President Roosevelt, and I took this picture with a little box camera worth $1. Which makes me feel that you don't have to have the most expensive equipment to get good results. And the way I took this picture is that I had never known a president. So when he became president, I said to my mother, I'd like to go take his picture. And so when his mother came to visit my mother said this to her, and she said, well, I think that can be arranged. So the first time he came to Hyde Park, after being inaugurated, Mrs. Roosevelt sent her chauffeur, Mr. Depew, to pick me up, August 11th, 1933, and I went down to the house. I had to wait a few minutes because some of the cabinet members were there speaking with him. And then he came out on the front porch, and I took this picture and another one with his mother standing behind him.
Okay, that's right there.
And I sent her a copy because they turned out very well, but they were only little photographs.
Well, they look like they've kept their life.
Well, I saved the negatives very carefully. And this picture is in the book, The Gracious Lady, a biography of Mrs. Roosevelt.
So what do we have? What other pictures do you have here? Because these are all fast. Let's go to this. What's this here?
This is the Statsburg Tool Company, and that was operated by a German immigrant by the name of Bodenstein. And this operated in the village of Statsburg for several years and was very necessary because the ice cutting business was a big winter industry on the river, and they needed proper tools. And Mr. Bodenstein manufactured these, and we were at Cooperstown this summer and found that they have a big exhibit of Bodenstein ice tools. And they're real collector's items now.
I bet they are. What other picture do we have here?
That's the United Nations. Now, the United Nations was considered for Hyde Park.
You mean to be located here for?
To be located here before it was decided definitely where to put it.
Was that because of its proximity to the river? You know, using the river to get here?
Well, and you know, the estates we had, it was supposed to be 5 square miles of space that they needed, and we had the Vanderbilt estate for sale, the Rogers estate being used but not really, and the Roosevelt estate. So we had the land and the beauty, but I guess we didn't have the transportation and the communications that they wanted.
Let me ask you something. How long did it take you to put all this book together?
A long time, because we were very, very fortunate. We have the Roosevelt Library for a resource, and they have a very good collection. And the Hyde Park Village Library has a very good collection. And the best photograph in this book was done by a Hyde Park man who was a photographer, bicycle repairman, fishmonger, everything. But he did beautiful photography, and the collection is in the Roosevelt Library and the Hyde Park Library, and then the Hyde Park Historical Society, and from a lot of natives.
Is that the picture right there? No, that's not. You're talking.
This is Daniel Wigg, who was a blacksmith in town, and he developed a liniment which he advertised was good for man or beast. And apparently it was, because it was manufactured in Hyde Park and sold in Doty and Humphrey in Poughkeepsie, which was a drugstore.
We have to go because we're coming to the end of the time. There's so many pictures in the book. I mean, there's just hundreds of beautiful, wonderful pictures in here. We have to go. We want to tell you to see Margaret Logan Marquez down at the Barnes & Noble on September 22nd between 2 and 4. You can get a book, you can get it signed, and you can learn a lot about the history of Hyde Park. There's a lot more there. We have to go. Till next time, I'm Terrence Micas. Good night.
We have a proclamation. Whereas Margaret Marquez, the town historian, has recently had a book entitled Hyde Park on the Hudson published, and whereas said book gives a fascinating pictorial view of much of the history of Hyde Park, be it resolved that the Hyde Park Town Board would like to proclaim August 26, 1996 as Hyde Park on the Hudson Day. Be it further resolved that special thanks be conveyed to Mrs. Marquez, and that this proclamation be part of the official minutes of the town board meeting, as well as a personal copy to be presented to her personally by the supervisor. should be proud of this woman. You should see this book.
Buy it. I didn't get it. I'm sorry. I'll get it.
Thank you very much. I have a very definite purpose for this book. I hope it will stir up interest in the Hyde Park history. And there is much, much Hyde Park history that has been forgotten. And I hope to work on it some more and have the rest of you help me if you can. Thank you. I also want to apologize for the long reading yesterday for signing of the book. It was not my fault. There were too many people.
Thank you, Margaret. Members of the press, we do have a handout that goes with Margaret's book. I also have a prose form of the statement, which I read.